Phil Craig is the spokesman for the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. We haven't had a chance to talk for a while, so it's good to catch up again. Lots happening on that front. Cape Independence, of course, means the Western Cape going its own way, away from South Africa. That's what Phil wants. Do the people of the Western Cape want it as well? Oh, interesting results of a survey that they've just put together. Yeah, those results, which we will talk about in just a moment, Phil, are quite comprehensive. But who did you survey? Who did you speak to? Given that if we talk racial groups, over 50% of people in the Western Cape are coloured by the old classifications. So they're going to decide whether or not there's independence happening to this part of the country if the rest of the country says it's okay. But I think it's important that we understand who it is that you've surveyed before you give us the results.
Sure. No, absolutely. Look, this it's a demographically representative sample. So people always ask us about this. It genuinely is representative of the population as a whole. There are white people, coloured people, black people, male, female, old people, young people. It's demographically. First of all, it's a random phone sample. So basically, there's a list of all the mobile phone numbers of everybody everybody in South Africa. They then call any of those numbers. The first question they ask is which province you're in. If somebody is not in Western Cape, they hang up. So that's how we know we've got the Western Cape. Then they move forward, and then at the end of it, there's an adjustment to make sure that the sample is entirely representative of the existing population. So this really is everybody in the Western Cape. There is no jiggery pokery. It's not some section of the Western Cape. It is everybody in the Western Cape.
How many of these have you done over the years?
So this is the third one that we've done. We did one in 2020. We did one in 2021. We didn't do in 2022. And then we've just done now in 2023.
And how have the results been trending?
Oh, look, yeah, absolutely up and consistently so. So I think but both, there's always been slightly more support all the time for a referendum than Cape Independence itself, and that would be natural. Each year we see an increase, and it's been a steady and consistent increase, and I think that's logical as things continue to get worse in South Africa. And I think people then start to get used to the idea of Cape Independence. Now we see awareness is also becoming more aware, so I think it's sort of people understand now it's an option, it's a genuine option, and we're definitely seeing this steady and, well, perhaps more than steady increase in support for Cape Independence.
There are a lot of people who don't like the idea, especially people who live outside of the Cape, and including some of the leadership of the Democratic Alliance, which runs the Cape. So perhaps when you get criticized or when you get tackled on the subject, how do you respond to them?
Well, look, so I think, everybody has their own race to run, and we understand, the political parties, we've got to be realistic. Political parties largely exist for the benefit of political parties, and they have a particular agenda that they try to drive, and the DA's agenda is largely a national agenda, frankly, Cape Independence is rather inconvenient for them. So they would rather, because they have national ambitions, and you see that now. You see the DA trying to sort of paint this two-choice future in 2024: doomsday, or vote for this rather unlikely national coalition, and actually no mention of the fact that in the Western Cape there's a very, very obvious third option, which is, well, we don't think you're going to get national government in 2024. We definitely don't want doomsday, but actually 68% of us want a referendum on Cape Independence, which is what you promised us. And that is the solution. So, and for the DA, of course, that's quite an inconvenient message, because they want people to buy into their dream of this national government, which we don't want to undermine at all. I think it's highly unlikely we're going to see the ANC out of power in 2024. I think we're likely to see perhaps some provincial governments fall, but certainly not national governments.
Phil, what about the fact that there could be a change in government in 2024? Is that inconvenient for the Cape Independence lobby? Let's just say that there were to be a coalition government taking control, that the ANC were to be out of power. Would that be something that that wouldn't work for you anymore? Would you then just take Cape Independence off the table?
No, look, we would be absolutely delighted if the ANC were out of power in 2024. I mean, it's not that we don't have huge empathy for people living in the rest of South Africa. I think we just have to have a sort of a horses for courses solution. In the Western Cape, we don't need to gamble our entire future on the very remote possibility that the ANC is no longer in power after 2024. We can just chart our own course, because the majority of us have never voted for the ANC once in the last 30 years. If you're in Gauteng, then perhaps you've got a realistic chance of getting provincial government, and unfortunately, if you're in the Northwest or in Limpopo, you're kind of stuck with an ANC government, and that's that. And then perhaps that's when you come down to the sort of self-help and community support. So we're definitely not against that, but we have to be realistic. So now we will do everything we can, and we always have done, to support, the agenda for change. But nothing is going to stop us. Ultimately, our primary aim in the Western Cape and Cape Independence is not to get rid of the ANC. The ANC are the symptom and not the cause. The problem in the Western Cape is that we don't get the government we voted for. And if we get the ANC out of power and we get the EFF back in, or have we or somebody else just as bad, how are we any better off? So actually what we are fighting for is to get the government that we vote for and the government that we want, and be governed according to our democratic will. But I think we also have to be realistic and say there is virtually no chance that the ANC is not going to be in power after 2024. Perhaps in coalition, but actually the prospect of having no ANC government in 2024 and this collection of parties increasing their share of the vote from some 30% to 50% miraculously is just not going to happen.
But my question is, if that were to happen, would that mean the end of Cape Independence?
I don't think so, no. But again, coming back for the same reason, that the people of the Western Cape still want to have the government they voted for. So, I mean, if let's imagine that we do end up with that coalition. What is that coalition going to be? It's going to be a collection of parties who have vastly different views, and some of them will support race-based policy, and some of them won't, and some of them will be much more tribal and racial in nature, and some will be non-racial, and they're going to have to cobble together a government. Look, let me not evade your question. If South Africa could be saved, then yes, we'd have to sit down and consider Cape Independence in terms of what's the whole purpose of Cape Independence. It's saving ourselves and creating a future for our family. And so and if South Africa wasn't where it was, there probably wouldn't be a Cape Independence movement. But it is where it is.
So let's go through the data. 68% want a referendum. What does that mean?
Well, it means that 68, when asked, in fact, let me just give you the exact question here. Let me find the right one for you here. Do you support or oppose the idea that there should be a referendum in the Western Cape to test whether people in the province would like the Western Cape to become an independent country separate from South Africa? Yes, 68.0%. No, 30.2%. Undecided, or didn't say, 1.9%.
That's quite comprehensive.
It's comprehensive. Yeah, it's comprehensive.
So it means that we want to have the opportunity to decide whether or not the Western Cape should be independent. That's what the people are saying to you. And then you move on to the next question. What percentage of the people that you polled said when you get that referendum, they will actually vote for independence?
Sure. So support for Cape Independence then becomes slightly more, because we asked that at various stages during the poll, and we always use the exit one as the one that's the last time of asking, because the poll is quite a lengthy poll where we sort of talk to people. So the final question that we asked for there is, now thinking again, do you support or oppose the Western Cape becoming an independent country? And the answer was 58.4% supported, 34.8% opposed, and 6.7% didn't say or undecided. So we have this 68 in support of the referendum and 58 in support of Cape Independence.
That's quite comprehensive, but I just want to take you back into history a little. I'm reading at the moment about the Abraham Lincoln presidency in the United States. And when he was elected as president, the southern states, call it Western Cape, voted comprehensively to retain slavery. And indeed, they were angry with Lincoln, who just didn't want to expand slavery to other new states. It wasn't a question of him trying to do away with their existing rights. And they went to war over that.
I don't think so, and I think the people who tend to talk about war. I'm not including you in here. I know you're asking the question. Are people who really just want to sort of close down this debate on Cape independence. I think fundamentally, democratically, in a democratic country, going to a section of the population, a province which has its own government and parliament, and saying, "What do you want?" Everybody have a vote should not lead to war. And actually, so were it to lead to threats of war, you have to ask, well, what kind of person would possibly want to repress democracy in the Western Cape on the basis of that? So I don't think, ironically, we certainly have seen no signs of that at all. And actually, the United Nations interestingly issued a report which actually dealt with this. So actually, they in the United Nations, they talked about the sources of conflict around the world, and obviously, often there's kind of like, well, you can't do this. You can't have democracy here because that's going to lead to war. And actually, the United Nations said that over a period of the last 60 or 70 years, that almost all conflicts had their source in the denial of self-determination. When you get conflicts, it's not normally because actually your people are trying to exercise their democratic rights. It's always when somebody's trying to repress people's democratic rights that you end up with problems. And I think that's fair. So we have to come back and just say, look, really, what kind of person would object to a democratic referendum to determine the will of the people of the Western Cape? How could that lead to war unless you were dealing with somebody who was particularly sinister?
But I suppose there's always the argument that there is another way, and that is greater devolution of power to the provinces, which is what the DA is arguing for. Isn't there that like a middle way?
Well, so ironically, and I'm going to be sort of fairly candid here, there was a middle way, and the DA rejected it. So first of all, the devolution of power is not an option. The DA cannot deliver the devolution of power. It promised it in 2019. I can say with absolute categorically knowing they had no plan in place to deliver the devolution of powers that they promised, because I end up then sitting on the devolution. In fact, I instigated the devolution working group. And despite and rather than challenge the DA, we said, look, come, let's help you. Let's work together. We got civil society involved, and we said, let's see if we can deliver the devolution of powers. We can't. Devolution of powers is not an option. Then we said, okay, is federalism an option? And it was always presumed that it wouldn't. We then developed a footprint or a path to federalism. We scoped out a federalism bill. We wrote the Western Cape People's Bill, which would have given a constitutional path to federalism, and the DA blocked it because they looked federalism in the eye and they don't want to live federalism. That's the reality. So devolution is not possible because the national government is not going to give it. Federalism is possible, but the DA are not willing to do what it takes to get it. So the choice that people in the Western Cape are faced with is the status quo and a failing state, or Cape independence, and that's our two choices.
Perhaps your biggest challenge, though, is to get the majority of people in the Western Cape to understand exactly what you mean by Cape independence, because the perception that has been created is that they're a bunch of white guys who want to create a bigger Orania.
Look, we're in South Africa, so obviously, if you sort of kick against the status quo, you get banned for being racist. And yes, I get called racist on a daily basis. And frankly, it's this is South Africa. It's water off a duck's back. I'm profoundly non-racial. I lead an organisation that's profoundly non-racial, and we saw in this poll that once again, I think it's 68% of Cape independence supporters are coloured, and actually. This can never, ever be about white supremacy. We're talking about a vote that would require an outright majority of people in the Western Cape, where white people make up about 13% of the population. So there's just no credence to this. This is just a classic case. We don't want to deal with the issues around Cape independence, which are fundamentally about democracy and good governance. And therefore, we're just going to bandy around accusations of racism, because actually that's the quickest way to close down a debate in South Africa. But there's no way they're going to close down the Cape independence debate by calling me a racist. They can bring that on. I really don't care. I know my own conscience. We're fighting for a non-racial future. And if they want to scream from the sidelines about race, let them.
Phil, where do the various political parties outside of the DA stand on this? And in particular, I'm thinking of the Patriotic Alliance and the Freedom Front.
So the Patriotic, I've only ever once spoken to Gayton McKenzie once about this issue. He asked me to send him some information, and we agreed to speak again. I sent him the information, and he never took my call. So since then, he has maligned me since then on a fairly regular basis in the press. So I know he's clearly not a fan. But that's okay. That's where they are. The Freedom Front Plus, and it'd be interesting to see, because I think, for example, I wonder if the Patriotic Alliance isn't in exactly the same situation as Good, who have a largely coloured a supporter base. The leaders of Good are vehemently opposed to Cape independence, but Good voters are fundamentally, the vast majority are in support of Cape independence, and it's just a question of the leadership that's opposed, but their supporter base. Well, in many ways, the DA is the same situation. The leaders are opposed. 79% of Western Cape DA voters support a referendum on Cape independence, and the Freedom Front arguably is the one that's much more aligned. The Freedom Front support Cape independence, and their supporters support Cape independence.
Have you perhaps reached out again to Gayton McKenzie? Because if his views on what's going on with the population of the Western Cape are anything to go by, then if the Cape were independence, he would have a big vested interest in making it so, because he could be the president of this, if his views on the voter base are correct, the president of an independent country, whereas he's got no chance of becoming president of South Africa.
Well, you could use exactly the same argument for Alan Winde, who would be far more likely to be the president of an independent Western Cape, since he's leading a party that's got more than 10 times the support of the Patriotic Alliance. So, but my door is always open. Our door is open. We've always been an organisation that talks to everyone, I mean everyone. The EFF, the ANC. At the end of the day, South Africa gets solved through discussion. By no means, my door is always open to Gayton. I have absolutely no issue. They take anything personally, look, it would be great if Gayton were to come on board for Cape independence. But ultimately, who leads an independent Western Cape certainly isn't my decision. That's a decision for the people of the Western Cape to make for themselves. And the difference is they'll get to choose the government rather than having a government forced on them from outside, which they all rejected.
No, I understand that, but perhaps your story has not been properly communicated. And I get back to the perception being this is another Orania, or it is a view that there's a bunch of people who want to create this Orania where they can have retention of privilege into the future. That's the perception of it. And how do you address something like that, even or especially with a very forceful political personality like Gayton McKenzie?
Well, so on this issue, Gayton's just out of touch with the people of the Western Cape, and actually, I don't think that is the perception. I think that's the perception that certain people choose. But when we looked at polling, here's the numbers: 82% of coloured people in the Western Cape support a referendum on Cape independence, and 78% of them support Cape independence outright. And support amongst the coloured people, they were always the biggest group of Cape independence supporters because they were more numerical. But even on a pound-for-pound basis, the support amongst the coloured community is now higher than it is amongst the white community. So it's not me that's out of touch with Gayton, it's Gayton that's out of touch with the Western Cape.
And where do you go from here? You've now got another referendum. As you say, you instigated the devolution of power grouping. It was very exciting when you had your first meeting, and then nothing, as you've now explained. So where to from here?
Yeah, well, so not necessarily nothing. We've ended up with these two bills before Parliament: the Western Cape People's Bill and the Western Cape Powers Bill. Where to from here? So we've actually launched a campaign today as part of the release of these results. So we're calling for a referendum on Cape independence to take place on Election Day 2024. If we're going to determine on 2024 whether doomsday happens or not, then let's determine in the Western Cape whether we can avoid doomsday altogether. So we're calling for an election day on 2024. We're calling for that. Cape Exit have joined us. The Freedom Front Plus have joined us. The Cape Independence Party have joined us. And then a couple of small organisations, the Cape Youth Front and the Swartland Advocacy Group. And we've set up a website called capereferendum.org when we're writing to Premier Winde and President Ramaphosa asking for a referendum on election day. And we're going to give them until October the 10th to confirm that they're willing to do that. And if that, and actually we released as part of the press statement, and this isn't common knowledge, but we've released it today. John Steenhuisen, the leader of the DA, promised me personally and the CIG that the DA would fix the referendum legislation and call a referendum on Cape independence. And obviously, we know before the 2021 elections, there were a lot of discussions about that. And they said that whilst they didn't support Cape Independence, they supported a referendum. So now we want that referendum and we're calling for it. And we're going to give them till mid-October to agree to that referendum. If they don't agree to that referendum, then we'll move on to the next step of the plan. I don't particularly want to get into that now, but actually, it's come hell or high water. We need a referendum on Cape Independence, and we can't have a government that is ignoring 68% of its population. This is the reality. 2/3 of people in the Western Cape want a referendum. The people of the Western Cape have been promised a referendum by the DA, and the DA is telling us that it's doomsday in 2024, so we need a referendum. And actually, the Western Cape government is obliged by the Western Cape Constitution to act in the best interests of Western Cape citizens, Western Cape people. And actually, it can't possibly be not in the best interests of the Western Cape people to deny them a referendum that they want and they were promised and they need. So come hell or high water, we're pushing for that referendum.
So you're talking about having a referendum on whether the Cape should be independent for the people of the Western Cape on election day 2024.
That's exactly what we're talking about, yes.
But isn't that a little bit short-sighted? Because if I'm going to the polls, hoping for a change in government nationally, why would I then put all my eggs into one basket by saying, and I also want to have a change in the Western Cape, and the consequence of all of that could be you have a change in government nationally, but you also then are not going to participate in that because you've voted for independence of your part of the country.
Well, and I come back to the earlier statement. There is zero prospect of a national coalition government in 20. It's a ploy by the political parties to try and get people to vote for them. We can look at the mass, go and speak to any election. There is zero prospect. So it's not a choice. It's actually just an act of desperation. It was called a moonshot in the first instance. There is no prospect of that. So we want to have the referendum. We were promised it. That's our salvation in the Western Cape. Not actually. The fairy tale isn't Cape Independence. The fairy tale is a national coalition government that's going to be functional after 2024. That's the fairy tale. We're not interested in that fairy tale. It'd be lovely if it could come true. Cape Independence actually is a logical prospect. And one of the interesting things, and perhaps this is a bit of an aside, but it was quite fascinating. We've done a whole load of research around the poll, a lot of data now. One of the interesting things that we have found is that the overwhelming majority of educated people support Cape Independence, and almost the overwhelming majority of opponents of Cape Independence are very poorly educated. This is a very logical and rational step that we need to take, because it's the only hope that the Western Cape has of realistically saving itself. And we're going to phrase that choice really as a choice between an African first world country, the southern tip, or an African failed state. There are two choices, and in the Western Cape, we've never voted for that foundation of the failed state. It's time to get out now. And at least, if we're wrong and we go and have the referendum, the people of the Western Cape choose differently, then I will absolutely accept that result. But it's time to ask the people themselves what they want and not to speculate about it.
Phil Craig is the spokesperson for the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.